Hey everybody, today Rahdo talks through episode 19 of the podcast, which I'm sorry to say is probably going to be a little bit shorter than your average episode, which is kind of sad, and there's a number of reasons for that, which we'll go through as we move forward. As always, my normal structure is talk about upcoming games, then revisit top 10s, and then do the Q&A. So, we could jump as per normal, right directly into the talking about upcoming games. But here's the problem. What is the date today? It is the 7th of December right now. I'm actually running a little bit late. I should have filmed or recorded this like a week ago. And this is where I talk about, games that I have recently added to my 2016 Games of Interest geek list. Here's the problem. 2016 is almost over. At this point, there aren't any more 2016 games of interest. Now, there's a whole bunch of 2017 games of interest, but I haven't even started working on that geek list yet. I gotta do that sometime this month and roll it out in time for January 1st. So, with that in mind, I don't have anything ready to say. I haven't actually done my homework yet. Now, to make up for that, though, in the next podcast, which should hopefully be coming out by the end of this month or the first week of January, I will be able to do kind of a, hey, everybody, here's what's coming in 2017. It won't just be a small list of games. It'll be a big list of games. Stuff that didn't come out this year, stuff I've heard about that's on its way, etc., etc. So, we'll be getting to that next time. But for now, we don't have any games of interest to talk about. I'm so sorry, so sad. One of the reasons this is going to be a relatively short podcast. But don't worry, folks. I've got something in mind to make up for it, so hold on a second. We'll be right back with some top 10s. Okay, everybody, welcome back. And apparently, I need to apologize because Jen was eavesdropping on that last little segment I did, and she said, how long did you just spend to say absolutely nothing at all? I believe is what you just said.
Yeah.
Apparently, I said a lot of words without actually saying anything of substance, and for that, I apologize, everybody. Although I think it's pretty obvious that Jen doesn't really listen to the show, because if she did, she'd know that's kind of my thing. Waffling on at great length about a whole lot of nothing. And we're going to continue with that now by revisiting old top 10s. Now, last podcast, I promised to cover the other two top 10s that we had not hit, which were top 10 things Jen and I disagree about, and top 10 has a sad type games that I'm bummed we got rid of for various sundry reasons. And now here's the thing. There's really not that much to revisit on either of those topics. I went back and I looked through YouTube comments and Reddit comments and Board Game Geek comments, and for the one about Jen's and my disagreement, that was pretty straightforward. I think everybody understood that pretty well. And while I could probably list some more games that fall under those same blanket categories, I don't know that that'd really be adding much to the conversation there. And certainly nothing that you wouldn't be able to get just by going to http://gone.rahdo.com, where you can see a list of every game we've ever had that we've gotten rid of and why. And sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes it's because Jen and I disagree about the overall qualities of the game. But like I said, it's so rare, so incredibly rare, I don't think I'm going to spend any more time on that. Now, I could spend some time listing even more games that I recognize are awesome and that I'm kind of sad that we weren't able to enjoy and we therefore got rid of them. I listed 10, and the interesting thing that came up over and over and over again from feedback when I did that top 10 was, stop being such a Care Bear. That's not the term some people used. And just suck it up. Or do house rules. And, I got so much feedback from that top 10, I went and added a new frequently asked question entry to faq.rahdo.com, so I can now use that whenever anybody wants to tell me, stop being such a baby. It's not so mean. The player versus player stuff in that game, it's inconsequential. No one should be bothered by that. There's something wrong with you, or you're wrong, or you don't understand what you like. Or whatever. I don't know why people want to argue subjective arguments like this, but apparently they do. So I ended up making a new FAQ where I go, it's my longest FAQ answer, where I give my most thoroughly worded answer explanation of my stance on aggression in games. So, honestly, I don't know if there's much to talk about there because really it was just people repeating that same strain. I mean, heck, there's a lot more games I could talk about that we got rid of that were absolutely brilliant. Explorers of the North Sea, Dice City, Covert, City of Spies, Kuhn v. Lakia, Imperial Settlers, Pirates of the Seven Seas, Few Acres of Snow, Stronghold, New Dawn, Battle of your Souls, Season, Star Trek Fleet Captains, Neanderthal, Golden Ages. Tons of games that we got rid of because all really good designs, but too mean. I don't know what the point is to, belabor that. I mean, heck, a lot of these I've done run-throughs for, and I've talked at great length about why they were too mean. And, and then another really common reason we got rid of games, player count. At least that's a significantly less subjective thing. I think it's a little bit more objective when you can point to, hey, look, this is clearly a game that's better with more. 2, it suffers. Why would we keep a game around that suffers at 2 when we've got so many games that excel at 2? So, other games that I didn't mention in the run-through that we got rid of because of player count, like Space Alert, 5 Tribes, Dungeon Bazaar, Grog Island, Council of 4, Francis Drake, Asgard, 504, Yunnan. These are all really, really sharp games. Kill Shakespeare, Infiltration, but they need more than 2 to be at their best. And so I didn't keep them. And then, there's other weird reasons we sometimes get rid of games too, but, that's just ultimately not that interesting a topic either. So, right off the bat, boom! This is going to be a really short podcast. That's terrible. But don't worry, folks. I've got the solution. Just a couple days ago, I put up another top 10, which was best games that came out prior to 2009. And that has gotten so much feedback. So let's talk about that topic a little bit. I think I could go into great depth about it. One, it seems like like I said, it's only been up for a day or so, but the overwhelming response is, what about games X, Y, or Z? And whatever game they're mentioning, they all fall under the doesn't work well with 2, your Power Grids, your Settlers of Catans, your El Grandes, or is crazy mean and vicious in terms of gameplay, and Jen and I wouldn't like it. Your War of the Rings, whatever it might be. I think I really need to do a better job in my top 10s of prefacing right up front that, hey folks, remember, we don't play games that don't work well with 2, and we ignore games that, I used to do that in top 10s, but I didn't on that, and I really kind of regret it because I've spent a lot of time over the last 24 hours reminding people, Power Grid doesn't really work very well with 2. Yes, it is a brilliant game. It's not in my top 10 games because it's not a good 2-player game. Sorry. But here's what I did. I won't dwell on that. That was actually a tricky list to make. I have to admit, I was standing at the ready to do a top 10 list for 2008, 2007, 2006, 2005, 2004, 2003, and 2002. I think, if I recall correctly. And then I was going to do a blanket one for everything from 2001 back, basically everything from the previous century. Month after month after month, the voters kept saying, no, we don't care about the best games of 2005. Why do you keep asking us this? But it was finally when I said, hey, everything prior to 2009, that the voters said, yeah, we'll listen to that list. But here's the thing. I've still got my list of all these games that are really, really great. Or I should say that Jen and I really, really enjoy from all these years. So, let's actually break it down, not just everything prior to 2009, but let's just break it down by year. Let's talk about 2008. Now, on the top 10 list, 2 games, my number 1 and my number 3, Pandemic and Dominion, came out in the year 2008. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other games came out that Jen and I really, really like quite a bit. We haven't kept all of them, but we really, really like them. And those are Dixit, which to this day is the only game we own that has a minimum 3-player count on it. And honestly, I don't know why we keep it because we never actually get to play it. Even when people come over, we end up playing something else. But Jen loves it so much, and it is such a brilliant design. That whole notion of, everybody's played Dixit. I don't have to explain it right now. Although I feel bad because I've never done a run-through for it. Maybe someday I will. It's honestly, though, another reason I'm inclined to get rid of it is because we have Mysterium now. And personally, I like Mysterium more. It does the same thing, but does it more interesting way. It can actually work well with 2. But Jen loves Dixit so much, we'll always keep it around. And heck, maybe once every couple of years we'll get to play it. So 2008 gave us that. And let's see, they gave us Roll Through the Ages, a brilliant Yahtzee dice civilization builder from Matt Leacock. Absolutely love that game. Stone Age is a wonderful gateway-style worker placement dice rolling game. Actually, I remember correctly, I think I put that in my top 10 gateway games, which I did a few years ago. Ghost Stories, I absolutely love that cooperative game, although it's one of those ones that would fall under the aegis of games Jen and I disagree about, because it's a co-op that is cruel and unrelenting, and Jen hated it, but I loved it. I thought it was an absolutely phenomenal game. And then there's Le Havre. We actually kept Le Havre for a long time and enjoyed it quite a bit. But I ultimately got rid of it when I learned that we had been playing it wrong for literally years. And when we started playing it correctly, I found the game was significantly weaker. And of course, that's going to immediately people say, well, just keep playing it wrong. I'm like, well, no, I don't want to play it wrong. If I want to play it the way it was designed by Uwe Rosenberg, because I'm sure I know he's a smart guy, he's a brilliant designer, and he has his reasons for doing things the way he did it. But basically, Jen and I, we played Le Havre for the longest time, such that you have to, every cycle that, every round that you go through, if you owe money and loans, you have to pay for every single loan you've taken. The real rules, which we never realized, were, no, it doesn't matter how many loans you take, you only have to pay a flat fee. So the game actively encourages and in fact rewards you for burying yourself in debt. Because you can take on 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 loans and just get a ridiculously huge amount of money and suffer no ill consequences. Because by the end of the game, you're making so much money, you'll be able to pay those loans off easy. When we played it the wrong way, where every loan made us have to pay interest, that would destroy you and the game would become too challenging. But played correctly, the best thing to do in that game is take a bunch of loans and build for the big shipping, steel and coke big ship thing at the end. And the game always kind of ends the same way. We found it suddenly got very repetitive. Whereas before, where you couldn't afford to take all those loans, you had to work a bit harder, and other in-game strategies, going big into cattle and leather, were viable alternatives because you needed a way to get food. But when you can just purposely not make food and instead take loans to cover all of that, the game kind of got broken. Now, to a certain extent, I understand why Le Havre needs to be that way for higher player counts, because the number of turns in a round doesn't really change much, so people need enough time. They don't have enough time to pay off big loans, but they need to take the loans. But as a two-player game, it almost kind of felt broken once we started. It worked, don't get me wrong. It was still a brilliant design, but the game became very samey, very rote. We could have gone back to playing it wrong, but I was not inclined to do that because in the back of my mind, I'm always worried, well, is the game actually balanced this way, or is there something broken? Why play a game that maybe we're playing by our house rule is actually making unbalanced when we could play a game that we know is balanced instead? So Le Havre did not stick around after I learned the proper way to play. But 2008 was a very good year. There's a few more games, but still, these were ones that we've all, at one point or another, enjoyed a lot. Now, let's move on to 2007. What do I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I got 11 games to talk about in 2007, which makes it, by my reckoning, the best year prior to 2009, because 2007 has 11 great games. What are they? Well, they're the ones I talked about in the top 10: Agricola, Notre Dame, Vikings, Galaxy Trucker, and Biblios. But there were a bunch more. Let's talk about In the Year of the Dragon. That was one a lot of people have asked about. Hey, what about Year of the Dragon? Year of the Dragon is an amazing game. Didn't quite make my top 10, but it certainly made my top 15. The reason it didn't crawl into my top 10 is because, as brilliant as that game is, and you can watch my run through to see more, man, when it goes bad for you in that game, it goes so bad, it goes so wrong. I'm always a little bit afraid to play it because maybe I'm going to have a really, really bad game of it. And, that's not the game's fault. That's my fault for playing poorly. But, it's weird. I just can't rate it as high as some of the other games in 2007 just because I always go in with a little trepidation. But on the other hand, man, In the Year of the Dragon has maybe hands down the best two-player variant rules ever. Anybody who fancies themselves a board game designer needs to play in the Year of the Dragon and understand just how amazingly brilliant Stefan Feld was when he came up with his two-player rules. That two-player action selection system, or restriction system, should say, would work so brilliantly in so many games. And so many games suffer at 2 because they don't introduce it. In the Year of the Dragon, in my mind, is so brilliant, it is kind of required playing if you want to design Euro-style board games that support 2 players. But anyway, what else went on in 2007? Well, we had Caelus Magna Carta. A lot of people asked, what about Caelus? What about Caelus? And I'm like, have you played Caelus? It's one of the meanest worker placement games in the market. Why would we ever want to play that? And we don't. That's why it didn't make my top 10, although it's a brilliant game. But Caelus Magna Carta, I talked about this in the run-through I did for it, is almost as brilliant. It does a wonderful job of distilling all the really awesome design of Caelus into a small portable card format. It's a great travel game. We've taken it on many trips. And it gives you the opportunity to strip all the nastiness of the Provost completely out of the game. So that's why Caelus Magna Carta, Uber Caelus, any day of the week for us. And let's see, then, Race for the Galaxy. A lot of people talk about Race for the Galaxy. How dare I mention San Juan, but not mention Race for the Galaxy? Now, of course, people who are saying that didn't actually watch my top 10 video. They just saw the list of it, because I did actually talk about Race for the Galaxy. It's a brilliant game. I choose San Juan over it because it doesn't, because of the icons. Sorry. Because of the icons. If they had adopted text on that game, it would win. It would have won over San Juan, but they didn't. So San Juan wins because they had the wherewithal to put text on their cards rather than a weird Byzantine hieroglyphics. So Race for the Galaxy stayed off the list because of that. Let's see, what else do you got? We've got Thebes. Thebes is a lovely little game. I have to admit, it's kind of been replaced by Thebes the card game, just because that game it's smaller, it's more compact, and it's faster. My big complaint about Thebes, which is a brilliant game about being an archaeologist, Indiana Jones style, with not fighting Nazis, but zipping all over the place, doing research, running archaeological digs. It's a brilliant game with a wonderful, wonderful mechanism. And when you do a dig, you reach into a bag and hope to pull out treasures and not empty sand. Really, really cool. But the problem with that game is it's too long. It's much longer than it should be. And so Thebes, the card game, or the Grave Robbers, the newer card game version of it, streamlined it. It became a much better game. So that's why Thebes didn't quite make the top 10. And then you got Hamburgum, which is a lovely game from Matt Gertz. It's another one of his rondels. And I have to admit, I haven't played this for a long time. I do wonder if it would ultimately be replaced in my mind by Concordia. Because, I love Navigador, but ultimately I traded it away because I realized I'll never play Navigador again when I could play Concordia. I think the same might be true of Hamburgum as well, but I need to go back and try it. And, last thing for 2007, a very, very, very good year would be Brass, of course, which is odd because officially it is not a 2-player game. It's a 3-player minimum. But fans of the game came up with an absolutely phenomenal 2-player variant that Jen and I have played several times, and we think it works wonders. And I cannot wait to get the new reprint that's coming next year that will actually, once and for all, officially ratify the 2-player rules, and it'll have a 2-player board and everything built in. I got rid of my original copy so that I can get the new one that's coming out. Very, very excited about that. Why didn't Brass make the top 10? It's long. It's a bit too long, and honestly, if we're going to play something that long, we'd probably play Railways of the World, which did make the top 10, over Brass. Some people said, why doesn't Brass? The other problem with Brass is, Brass is an interesting game because it's got 2 halves. The first, the pre-railroad and post-railroad, and the pre-railroad half where you're actually building canals to ship goods all up and down the industrialized England. It's a precursor. It's almost like a long extended setup, and the really interesting part of the game comes once you get that out of the way and you get into, the second half of the game. And I always kind of wish, I have to be fair, I haven't played it that often. I always kind of think, man, we're just kind of going through the motions. Can we just get through this part to get to the main part? I don't really have that problem with other games, so that's why Brass didn't quite make the top 10, although it's certainly brilliant. So anyway, 2007 was an awesome year. Now let's go back to 2006. No game from 2006 actually made my top 10, which is heartbreaking because there are, in fact, 6 games that I rate very, very highly from that year. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about Turn and Taxes, which is... It's a real shame. This one kind of seems to get overlooked. People often would prefer to play Ticket to Ride over Turn and Taxes. They have very, very similar feels about how you're collecting cards and using them to build routes and stuff like that. But Turn and Taxes is a much more interesting game. It's still very, very light, very gateway. It's very dry as well. Heck, maybe I like it because I was a mailman for a couple of years back in my early 20s, and so I have a fondness for the subject matter. But it's still a really, really sharp game, and I think holds up. We actually have the expansion for it. I've never actually played with that, but I'd like to someday. Not that I ever get a chance because I'm always having to play all the new stuff. No time for the old stuff. Let's see, what else in 2006? We've got I just mentioned that. We've got Blue Moon City. An excellent Reiner Knizia game, kind of an interesting area control, which is interesting in and of itself because generally area control is a little bit too confrontational for us, but it works brilliantly in this game. You can watch my run through to find out more, but really neat game. Not neat enough to make the top 10, but really neat. Then you got Through the Ages, which is a phenomenal design. It's a towering achievement of design. And the only reason we don't own it is because Nations destroyed it for us. Nations we can play in half the time, and it doesn't require Nations is nowhere near as mean and in your face and all about destruction as Through the Ages is. But Through the Ages, I mean, I got to give props to it. It is an absolutely brilliant masterpiece. Is insanely influential and an absolutely wonderful design, but too mean, too long for us. That's why it didn't make the top 10. And in fact, we don't even keep it because Nations does everything it does better. For our taste, I should say. So many would disagree with that. Then you've got Tuluva, which is a very, very charming tile-laying game. Carcassonne-esque, where we're all laying tiles to the same central thing and building up this big, I think it's a Polynesian island, and we're trying to claim spaces with our little village huts and stuff like that. Kind of Carcassonne-esque, but the brilliant thing about this game is not only do you spread outward laying the tiles, but you build upwards, because this is a volcanically active island. And so you can lay tiles on top of others to represent the volcanoes pushing the island up higher and higher and higher. It's a really, really sharp game with wonderful components. These incredibly lovely, cool, thick tiles, so that when you've actually finished, you've built something of substance. It's really, really nice. I'll probably be doing a run-through within the next couple months because it's almost at the top of the thumbs list on the request list. And in fact, I think it either has recently gotten a reprint or is about to get a reprint. So all the more reason for me to do this run through, because I think the reprint for some reason is ridiculously high priced. But I mean, for the longest time it was ridiculously high priced because it was out of print and nobody could find it. But anyway, Tuluva from 2006 is a lovely, lovely tile laying game. And then there's also Makirinos, which is another one of those interesting oddities, an area control game that Jen and I actually enjoyed. Now, I've done a run-through for this, so you can go check that out, but it's an archaeology trying to, claim plots of land in Egypt so that we can dig up artifacts and display them back home in the museum. And there's area control going on out in the desert. There's area control going on in the museum. It's a really, really smart role selection game. There's a lot going on, and we actually enjoy it quite a bit. We didn't keep it, therefore it's not in the top 10, because... Well, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the game at all, but the more we played it, the more kind of vicious the area control got. It's another great example of how to do area control really well for two, because it has this very smartly implemented two-player dummy system, and it's the dummy system that made the game. It's interesting. Jen and I, we had it for a long time. We enjoyed it. We found it playable. It was a little aggressive, but we lived with it. But then we actually played it as a three-player game once, and suddenly, oh man, it's hard to go back and play this as a two-player game. Not because it doesn't work well as a two-player game, but because the two-player game is so much more cutthroat. So ultimately, I traded away, but it's still absolutely brilliant. You can watch my run-through. And then the last one from 2006 is this very, very clever little maze fantasy racing game called Drakon, Drakon. Came out in 2006. It's been reprinted a couple of times. And it's a game where everybody's just racing to get out of this dungeon. But the thing is, the tile, you're building the dungeon, laying tiles as we go, trying to find the exit. And every tile that we have when we move into it can trigger different effects like rotating tiles and doing all kinds of funky stuff. It's a little in your face, but it's really clever. It's very fast and fun and light. Going to be a much more interesting game with more than 2, but we did enjoy it back in the day. So I think actually we still have it up in the attic in England, actually. Don't love it, but definitely liked Draken. So that was a quick review of some of the games we liked or loved in 2006. Now let's move on to 2005. 2 games from 2005 made the list, Glory to Rome and Railways of the World. But there's 4 more that didn't make the list, and they all deserve notice. Runebound 2nd Edition. Oh man, such a great game. And Runebound 2nd Edition is so much better than Runebound 3rd Edition. Now, I've talked about that at great length in my Runebound 3rd Edition run-through. I talked about it in Runebound 2nd Edition. Although, interestingly, just this week, we took and put my huge collection of Runebound 2nd Edition stuff in the mail, sent it off to somebody in Germany because as much as I liked it, I couldn't justify keeping it in the closet because we just never got to play all that wonderful content. I mean, I had Midnight, I had Sands of something, I mean, I had 3 of the big box ones, I had a dozen of the small box expansions. I mean, the guy I sold it to, he got it for a song. I hope he really enjoys it, but it's an absolutely brilliant, fun. It's one of the few Ameritrash games that Jen and I enjoyed, and if we had it right here, we'd enjoy it still even more. But, you know, with stuff like Gloomhaven coming in the future, I just know I'll never have a chance to play it again. But it's still brilliant. Loved it at the time. Runebound 2nd Edition, not 3rd Edition, which, again, for my taste, took a real tumble in terms of design quality. Still a great game, but I thought, I talked about it in the run-through, so you can hear more about it there. Roma from Stefan Feld is an awesome little 2-player facing off against each other with a battle line in between us. I'm playing my cards to my side. You're playing your cards to your side. It's almost like what would happen if Stefan Feld made a Magic the Gathering style game. Turns out, it's brilliant. It's a really, really sharp game. You can see why in the run-through I did. And ultimately, I didn't keep it because we really liked it. But again, it's a very in-your-face game where you spend a lot of time trying to destroy your opponent's stuff on their side of the line. And after I played Institute of Magical Arts, which had that same kind of players face off across a line and play stuff to each other's side, but you know, Institute of Magical Arts is so good. I mean, I just couldn't keep Roma. Roma got killed by Institute. But still, a phenomenal game from 2005. Liked it quite a bit. Then you've got Fjords, which I did a run-through for not too long ago. One of our absolute favorite travel games. Such a wonderful, charming little tile-laying game. Another example of area control, that rarest of things, area control that we actually enjoy. We still enjoy it to this day. It's basically a little chess match. I mean, everything about this game means we should not like it, but we both enjoy it tremendously. Maybe it's because of the small size. Maybe it's because of the incredibly short, fast play time. The really wonderful presentation. It's a real shame this game has been out of print forever and likely will never get reprinted. I recently found out, after I did the run-through and I was bemoaning the fact that it has never gotten a reprint. Turns out the designer, the very talented designer of this game, died. And that might be why it never gets reprinted, because the rights reverted back to him and no one has the rights to print it now. Which is, it's heartbreaking that he died, but even more heartbreaking that people now cannot enjoy his wonderful, wonderful design of Fjords. Anyway though. And then last one from 2005, we've got Ticket to Ride Europe. Which, for my money, I played a bunch of Ticket to Rides. It's the best one. Still better than all the others. Now that said, not good enough for us to keep. A while ago, I started calling out a lot of our gateway level games because, Jen and I, we just don't play games that light anymore, and we don't have that much use for gateway style games because we don't gateway very often, living here in the middle of nowhere in Malta. But doesn't mean it's not an absolutely wonderful game, and we've had a lot of great times playing it. Actually, that was the game, if I recall correctly, we used on Jen's parents the first time we were showing them what games were like, and they loved it too. Really, really sharp stuff. And Ticket to Ride doesn't get any better than Ticket to Ride Europe, which came out in 2005. Let's move on to 2004. I've got 4 games of note. I remember I said right up front, I could have made a top 10 for 2004. There were certainly other games I could talk about that maybe we didn't like, but that are very, very good. But there are 4 games that we actually like and or love. One of them made my top 10, San Juan. I talked about it in the video. But the other 3, St. Petersburg is a phenomenal design. It's one of the best early examples of engine building. It's in my top 10 engine building games of all time. Absolutely brilliant. You can hear more about my top 10 engine builders or video, or you can watch my run through and hear what we thought about it. But it's a great game. It recently got a reprint, and I had the option to get the reprint, which had some new modules and whatnot. But I ultimately decided, you know what? I like the original version better. I like the original art style, and some of the stuff that the new version added, I wasn't a big fan of. So I stuck with my original 2004 edition of St. Pete's, which I think would have been in my top 15 if I'd kept, counting out. Then we've got Antiquity, which is a brilliant civilization game. I did a run-through for that one a few years ago. Man, that was tough. And while we both like the game, I had to get rid of it for several reasons. Box, comically oversized. Just absolutely insanely, needlessly too large. And I've got limited shelf space. So that killed it right there. Length, way too long for our taste, much like Through the Ages and whatnot. And fiddliness, oh my gosh. Probably a prime candidate for the most fiddly board game in history. For reasons why, you can watch my run through, but that game has more tokens, and I mean, you need a pair of tweezers to play that game as you're delicately trying to pick up or place all these little tokens all over the board as you build up your civilization. Also, it was maybe a little bit too confrontational for us, although we never found that to be too much of a problem. We could mostly live and let live in that game, and it was an absolutely brilliant simulation of stuff that most civilization games don't bother to simulate, like the environmental impact your civilization has on the surrounding countryside. Absolutely brilliant, wonderful game, and I believe it's going to be getting a reprint very soon, so well worth seeking out, again, if you've got a pair of tweezers to play it with. And then the last one from 2004 is Goa, which is a brilliant, brilliant, one-of-a-kind auction game / civilization builder. Nothing else quite like it out there. And really liked it. Ultimately got rid of it because it worked well as 2, but it's another one of those ones where, hey, when we eventually got a chance that we one time played it with 4, it was then kind of hard to go back and play with 2, because I remembered how much better it was. And, ignorance was bliss. If I'd never played it with 4, we probably still have it now and probably enjoy it as a 2-player game. But you know what? We've got a lot of auction games that are phenomenal as 2-player games, so we don't need one that works as a 2-player and is better with more. So that's why Goa didn't stick around, but still a brilliant game. Still would make my top 10 of 2004. That's why it didn't make my top 10 of prior to 2009, though. Then, on to 2003. Pickings are getting slim, folks. In 2003, I've only got 2 games of note to me. One is Carcassonne the Castle, which was my number 11. A lot of people said, hey, why isn't Carcassonne in your top 10? And it's like, well, one, Carcassonne would never be, because Carcassonne Castle destroys Carcassonne. It is so much better. And that's Carcassonne with any combination of expansions you want. Does not come close to Carcassonne Castle. Carcassonne City does not come close to Carcassonne Castle. Nothing compares in the Carcassonne universe to Carcassonne the Castle. It's a shame it only works for 2 players. But heck, that's the only way we're going to play it anyway. So it's absolutely phenomenal. We absolutely love it. It's my number 11. And I really struggled. I was kind of tempted to, what was my number 10? Biblios? No, Biblios just barely beat it out. Both phenomenal games. But the other one that didn't make my top 10 that's worth mentioning is Attica, which is a neat little tile laying game. I remember we have not played that. It's still back in the attic in England. We haven't played it since we've moved to Malta. So I can't really say how high I rate it. We only played it a couple of times back in England. We thought it was really, really cool, but I have to admit, at this point, I barely remember it. All I remember is I did like it. But I just can't rate it as well as I could because I need to play it some more. But Attica is a really, really sharp tile-laying game, and that's all I can say because it's been so long. But anyway, let's move on to 2002, where we've got 3 games to talk about. Puerto Rico. Can't not talk about that. Now, of course, Puerto Rico is, again, officially a 3-player minimum game. And the designer, he ultimately did put out some kind of semi-official 2-player rules, and those have now become official when the Puerto Rico 10-year anniversary edition came out. But, the reason Puerto Rico doesn't make my list is, it would make my list if Jen and I, we played 3, 4, 5-player games more often. But we only play 2-player. And the thing that always bugs me is that whenever we would play Puerto Rico 2-player, I never had the sense of confidence that we were playing it right. Not that we were getting the rules wrong, but that there is a definitive correct way to play. Because the official 2-player variant rules, there are a lot of arguments against them, that there's like fundamental imbalances and that, just the developers never really spent enough time because it was kind of an afterthought. And there's just all this weird kind of controversy swirling around it that ultimately, well, two things. I always felt a little, we enjoyed the game, but we're like, hey, we've got San Juan. It works well as a 2-player game. We don't need all this, uncertainty of the 2-player experience of the full game. And then on top of that, I had the anniversary edition, which I knew I could sell for a lot of money. And, so it just didn't make any sense to keep it on the shelf when, I could sell it for, I sold it for a pretty good chunk of change, so that was pretty handy. And again, we just had San Juan, so I ultimately got rid of it. But I don't want to take anything away from it. Puerto Rico is brilliant. It certainly deserves its classic status. And all the time it was in the number 1 spot. And I don't think it's in the top 10 on Board Game Geek anymore, but I think it's in the top 20. Anyway, it's a brilliant, brilliant game, but really better off. It's one of those ones that's better off with higher player counts, basically. Oh, and then the last one from 2002. This one, I'll be honest, this one Jen loves a lot more than me. It's called Clans. And it's a neat little game because, what is it? It's a prehistoric man, the dawn of modern man, and you've got this board where you're placing these little huts and trying to get them to kind of glom together to become neat little clusters, little baby steps towards modern civilization. And the thing is, there's all these different huts of different colors, and you have a secret color that you're rooting for. You're trying to place stuff out on the board so that the color that you like most is the one that will thrive the most. But the thing is, if you just are really blatant about that and always make sure blue's doing real well, then everybody else is going to know, and they'll make sure blue fails. So you want to do well, but you don't want to be too obvious about it, because you don't reveal until the end of the game. And, there's other games that do this, but Clans is a really, really brilliant idea of it, and Jen absolutely loves it. Me, I'm a little on the fence about it, because I think it's better with more than 2. At 2, it's not as easy to hide, and there's not quite as much chaos. I think it'd be better with more, but it's still a really, really sharp game, and Jen absolutely loves Clans. Now, nothing happened of note in 2001. Gasp, there I said it. But now let's move on to 2000, where I've got 2 games of note. Citadels, which I've done a run-through for, so you can see what we thought of it. Ultimately didn't keep it because, again, these days, there are so many games that don't require player conflict that we didn't need to keep a game that did require player conflict, but still a really sharp game, Citadels. The other one, though, Lord of the Rings from Reiner Knizia, I love this one to death. It's the first modern cooperative Euro game. Brilliant, brilliant design. A little abstract, but still very sharp. Didn't keep it because it was too harsh and unforgiving. And it was one of those co-ops that Jen, in fact, it was the first co-op that we ever encountered that Jen said, yeah, this is just too mean. I don't like this feeling of that we're doomed, we'll never actually succeed. And of course, you can succeed. It's against all odds that you do succeed. I love that kind of, underdog story, but Jen just didn't like it, so we didn't keep it. But Lord of the Rings was, I thought, a phenomenal design. I'd love to play it right now. But anyway, now let's get out. Let's go back to the 20th century. Actually, I guess the year 2000 is in the 20th century as well, right? But anyway, let's go back to 1999. 3 games of note worth talking about. One of them, several people said, hey, what about Tikal? Tikal is neat. But there's no way it can make my top 10 prior to 2009. Because, man, on your turn, getting 10 action points to spend. It's funny how back then they called them, you get 10 AP, 10 action points. But they might as well said, you get 10 analysis paralysis. Because that game is designed to make you grind for a half an hour every turn trying to decide how to spend those 10 action points. Absolutely insane. I bet you anything, if Kramer and Kiesling were designing that game today, they would do it in a different way. They wouldn't do that 10 action point drop because, and plus, the default rules were terrible for 2. Now, when I did a run through for it, I showed a really nice variant that works wonderfully for 2, and it to a certain extent, it does kind of help mitigate the analysis paralysis problem with that game just because it makes the game so much shorter. But the rules as written, the game is insane. Now, I haven't played the other Mass Trilogy games, Java and Mexica and Torres, the fourth in the trilogy. So I can't speak to those, but Tikal we really like, but not top 10 material. And let's see, what else from 1999? Lost Cities. I wouldn't be surprised if that did make Jen's top 10 of prior to 2009, because it's really, really brilliant. And when I did the run-through of it, I talked at length about why I have a problem with it and Jen doesn't. It's a really, really sharp game, though. We both like it. Definitely a keeper. And arguably, I would say maybe it is Reiner Knizia's greatest design ever. And that's saying something, because he's got a brilliant pedigree. At which point people are saying, hey, what about Tigris and Euphrates? Yeah, great game. Actually, Jen loved it. She didn't mind the meanness, but it was way too mean for me. Other one, though, again, Reiner Knizia. Oh, man, what a great year for him in 1999 is Raw. Another game that arguably doesn't support 2 players, but the semi-official 2-player variant we have found works phenomenally, and it's a great little auction game. Really, really sharp. Like it quite a bit. Raw. Someday I'll do a run-through for it, but again, it's another one of those ones that's back in the attic in England. 1998 is on the list. One game. Samurai, which I've done a run-through for, so you can see it. Another Reiner Knizia game. Another area control game that works really well with 2. Very, very sharp. Then, 1997 and 96, I'm afraid we're going to have to skip and go all the way back to 1995. What the heck? The 90s were the decade of Knizia, because in 1995, we have Medici. Again, another game that officially does not support 2. This is, it's really, really interesting. Another thing that's come up after I did the prior to 2009, a lot of people say, man, games used to be so much better back then than they are now. The percentage of games, back in the day, there were a lot less clunkers, a lot more greats. One, I don't believe that's true for a second. And two, a big problem I've noticed when I was making this list, there were so many brilliant games back then. But back then, designers just didn't seem to give a good gosh darn about the 2-player experience at all. I mean, Raw didn't care. Samurai? No, Samurai did work, but Medici didn't care. Puerto Rico didn't care. I mean, these days, so much more love and attention is put into 2-player design. Not always, but, it's a much, much better game landscape these days for 2 players than it was back in the day. But anyway, Medici, interestingly, really great 2-player auction. But it wasn't until the year 2016 that we found that out, when Reiner Knizia officially revisited the design to do a new reprint of Medici that included proper 2-player rules. They were really, really simple to implement, and they made the game a really good 2-player auction. Why didn't he do that back in 95? Because in the 90s, nobody cared about 2-player gaming. Whatevs. Although I'm going to undercut that now by I'm going to skip 1994 and go to 1993, because I can't not talk about Magic the Gathering, of course, which is a brilliant game. It's a brilliant design. It is arguably the most important game in, analog, non-digital game in my lifetime, in terms of impact, of the industry and design norms. I mean, its impact cannot be understated. An absolutely towering, phenomenal accomplishment from designer Richard Garfield. And, back in the day, back in the mid-90s, Jen and I, we played a lot of Magic the Gathering. And this was the only thing we knew of that existed of modern game design. And, and all the other Magic the Gathering clones that were spawned. We played the Star Wars one, we played the Star Trek one, played Netrunner, we played a bunch of them. But ultimately, we kind of burned out on them for reasons that let's see, did I ever talk about that? I think I did. Didn't I talk about that at some point? I don't know. That basically the modern deck builder has replaced the classic. Yeah, that's right. I talked about it in my Netrunner run-through. Why Netrunner ultimately I find inferior to Dominion. And Dominion was just as much of a seismic shift as Magic the Gathering was. And but anyway, I still got to give props to Magic the Gathering. Let's move on even further into the Wayback Machine, leaving 1993 behind, moving on to 1992, folks, for a little game that Jen loves, and I think is pretty cool, but Jen loves: Confusion. which is basically, what would Stratego be like if your opponent could see what all your pieces are capable of and you can't? So you sit down, in a very Stratego-like thing. You've got all these pieces that have different rules. This one can move diagonally. This one can move forward. This one can, do whatever. But you're looking at the backs. I can't tell what this piece does, but my opponent can. So when it comes around to my turn, I pick one of my pieces, and let's say I try to move it forward and to the right 2 spaces. And then Jen, my opponent, she can see on the backside of my piece what it's actually capable of, and she says, yeah, your piece can't do that. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I didn't get to move, but I do make note of what that piece can do, and slowly, over time, you start to learn which pieces are which through this very neat deduction game. It's brilliant. Really, really clever. It got a wonderful reprint from Stronghold Games a few years ago. That's the version we have, not the original one that was printed in 1992. And it's just... Jen and I, we have no interest in chess-like battles for dominion on a chessboard, which is basically what this is. But the central gimmick of not being able to know what your pieces are, and having to slowly figure it out based on intelligence you get from your opponent, who, by the way, can lie about whether your piece is capable of doing stuff or not, is so brilliant. It's not brilliant enough to make the top 10, but still an absolutely phenomenal design. And then the last one, I totally forgot about this, because this is the oldest one. We're going to skip 1991, 1990, 89, 87, 86, 85, 84, 83, 82, going all the way back to 1981. And I forgot about it because it got reprinted in 2012. So if you look it up on Board Game Geek, it says it came out in 2012, which is why I totally forgot. It might have actually made my list if I hadn't forgotten about it, that it came out in 1981. What is it? Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, which I've done a run-through for, a spoiler-free run-through for, so you can learn what it's all about. But man, that game really does put you in the shoes of Sherlock Holmes. It's a wonderful cooperative experience decades before anybody thought a board game could be a cooperative experience. It's brilliant. It's innovative. It is so ahead of its time. Jen loves Sherlock Holmes. It's actually getting some new case files, I think this year or maybe next year. Yeah, it's getting some new case files printed. Absolutely brilliant. And like I said, if I'd remembered it, that it actually came out, and because again I was relying on the numbering system of Board Game Geek, it might have actually made the list of top 10. But anyway, folks, there was a little bit more depth into all the wonderfulness that came before 2009, before the year we got into board games. But you know what, folks? I'm not done yet. I'm going to be back with another game list to make up for everything else that was so short. So hold on. This is going to be a bit of a surprise. Okay, everybody. So this is going to be a little odd, but I'm going to hit a Q&A question before we move on to the actual Q&A section. Because in last month's podcast, Dave wrote in and asked, hey, could you look at the Board Game Geek top 50 and just do a quick run through of the top 50 with your opinions? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I could do that. But at the time we recorded last month's podcast, our internet was down. And so I literally could not do that. And so I said, hey, Dave, if you do in fact listen to this podcast, write the request in again and I'll do it next month. And Dave did. Okay, Dave, you ask, you receive. So let's jump right into it. So anybody can play along at home. Go to BoardGameGeek.com, and up at the top there is Browse, and under that, under Database, there is Games. Apparently, in the Board Game Geek database, there are 87,420 games that have been ranked. And so you choose that, and you'll be taken to that list of 87,000 games. And of course, I'm only going to talk about the first 50. These are actually, the list by default is sorted. And this is based off user votes on Board Game Geek. And apparently there's a lot of voodoo that goes into these rankings, because it's not just a straight average that, if 10 people all give it a 10 and one person gives it a 2, that it'll just average those out. There's actually some stuff that goes on behind the scenes with this general ranking where, they kind of auto-detect and throw away shill votes, and they put in some normalization and whatnot. So nobody knows exactly how this list is inspired by the users of Board Game Geek, but the actual raw nuts and bolts of it are, well, only Scott Alden and his crew know. They're the people who run Board Game Geek. So, is it a true is it a true objective list of the 50 greatest board games of all time? No, of course not. But it's a really cool list. There's a lot of really interesting stuff on it. And as per Dave's request, we are now going to scroll down to number 50, and I'm just going to blitz through them really, really quick, if for no other reason than just to have some filler, since I didn't have any games of interest, and I completely ignored 2 top 10s. And, spoiler alert, there aren't very many Q&As this month either, but you'll hear about those in a bit. So let's get going with number 50. Tigris and Euphrates. I felt like I just talked about that a few minutes ago from Reiner Knizia. What do we think? Well, I've mentioned this before. I'll mention it again. It's a brilliant design. I mean, and I think, while I'm often quick to say Lost Cities is his greatest, most perfect design game, a lot of people would argue, nope, Tigris and Euphrates is. And I would not argue that with them, because that's a perfectly reasonable stance to take. It recently got a reprint with some really nice upgraded materials. It is a game of area domination in the ancient Tigris and Euphrates Valley, the cradle of civilization. And it's a really, really sharp game, and it's very vicious. The central crux of it, I mean, we've only played it a couple of times, and it was back in 2010 when we were first getting into games and we were trying everything under the sun, and we didn't know if we liked aggressive in-your-face games or not. Tigris and Euphrates is the game that taught me, I don't like doing this. I absolutely hate making this move that's going to cause an internal revolt in your kingdom, or an external revolt. I always forget the difference. But, and it was funny, because as we were playing this game, I'm like, I really am just not enjoying this. And Jen's like, oh, I so enjoy this. And that was when I learned that she was more of a shark than I will ever be. She says she's a shark in a kitten's body for, that's kind of spoilers. Actually, now that I think of it. Well, you know what? People who know what I'm saying will get the reference, and people who don't, I didn't spoil it. So there you go. But anyway, Jen is a shark in a kitten's body, is all I'm saying. So, that was actually very educational. It was one of the early games that we tried, because I knew back in 2010 it was one of the best games ever designed, and it arguably is. Number 50 on the list, Tigris and Euphrates. Then on to number 49, Fields of Arle, which is, or Arla Erda, I believe in the original Deutsch. I have done a run through for it, so you can see what we thought there. Really, really sharp game. Very odd game. Basically all the depth and complexity and richness of an Agricola or a Caverna from designer Uwe Rosenberg, but for 2 players only. And I think it's actually really surprising that the game has ranked so high on this list, because that you would think limiting it to 2 players would keep so many Board Game Geek voters from even playing it or ever ranking it at all. Now, and maybe that's the case. Maybe the only people who are playing it are people who love 2-player games, and that's why it ranks so high, because there are so few games that are this heavy and this deep that are for 2 players only. Me and Jen, we definitely liked it, but as is so typical for Uwe Rosenberg design these days, we found it to be a bit too wide open and sandboxy for our taste, and we would rather just play Agricola when it boils right down to it. But still, a really sharp design. Really liked it. Number 49, Fields of Arla. Or Fields of Arla. All right, 48 is Dominion, which is just an absolutely brilliant game. It's one of my very few games I rate as a 9 on the 1 to 10 scale of Board Game Geek. And, both Jen and I absolutely love it. We love all the expansions that come out, some more than others. I'm hoping, before too long, to actually do a run-through. I'm just waiting. I've got an order that should be coming sometime this month that includes Feast of Odin and what's Arkham Horror, the new Arkham Horror card cooperative game, and the new reprints, because Dominion recently got a reprint, and so you could get upgrade packs to your original version of Dominion, as soon as those show up, I'm doing a run-through of Dominion. And I will demonstrate it. I'm thinking the way I'm going to do a run-through for Dominion is take one type of card from each of the expansions. Although I don't know if there might be too many expansions to do that. I don't know. We'll see. But I really want to show off everything the game has to offer with all the expansions. So that'll be interesting. But long story short, what's my opinion? Jen and I both love it. To this day, I would still argue it is the best deck builder available on the market. And I would also argue that it is much more thematic than it is given credit for. And for that, you can go back and listen to my very, very first podcast ever where I talked about that. Okay, number 47, Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. I've done a run-through for that. What did I say? In a nutshell, Madness and Mansion 1st Edition, a much better game. It's just crazy. I mentioned this earlier in this podcast that Runebound 3rd Edition was, in my opinion, from a design perspective, it made design changes that weakened the overall game, and Mansions of Madness did the same thing. I love the digital app integration. There was a lot of really cool stuff, but on the whole, some of the streamlining design decisions that were made for this, like Runebound, really weakened the overall experience. And I think it basically took some of the bite out. The 2nd edition, meh. 1st edition, yeah. So, 46, Battlestar Galactica. What's my opinion? I've never played it, and I very much doubt I ever will. I'm certainly interested to try it, but my understanding is it's like a 3-hour minimum game. As much as I love Battlestar Galactica, I love the original show and I love the reboot, but I can't imagine we'll ever get this played. Not the least of which is because it doesn't support 2 players. Oops. Number 45, Lords of Waterdeep, which is a phenomenal game. I listed this in my top 10 gateway games, and I would certainly stand by that. If I ever do a list of games, someday I might do a top 10. These are the games you can use to convert video game fans into board game fans. This would definitely make that list. Really, really sharp. Better with more players, but still works well with 2. And the thing I love about more than anything else, the worker placement is pretty straightforward. It works well, but it has this one interesting twist that there's one spot you can place your workers that lets you place them twice, place them a second time at the end of the round. That, plus the intrigue cards that, instead of attacking other players, let you choose which other player to help. These are both brilliant things. It's a wonderful thematic exercise as well. It's just really, really sharp. Very, very clever. Really like a lot. Lords of Waterdeep, and Jen loves it. All right, on to number 44, Star Wars X-Wing Miniatures game. Well, anything I would have to say about that, I said in my Star Trek Attack Wing run-through, so you can go check that out. Long story short, neat, clever, would never want to play it because neither Jen nor I want to blow each other out of the sky, and way too much dice rolling for our tastes. There are some games that Jen and I do enjoy that are having us attacking each other out and out. This would not be one of them. So, just a pass. Although those miniatures are really, really cool looking. On number 43, 5 Tribes. Oh man, can we just skip this? I really don't want to go down this rabbit hole again. Suffice to say, brilliant brilliant Moncala, freeform Moncala game. Less than ideal with 2 players. Enough said. I don't want to go down to any of the controversial elements of that again. But really sharp. Oh, brilliant and lovely, colorful game too. Lots to recommend there. I'm not surprised at all it ranks so high. On to number 42, Dominion Intrigue. Okay, now this drives me nuts. Dominion Intrigue and Dominion should be the same gosh darn entry on this list. So, number 48 was Dominion. We're ignoring that. Everything I would say about Dominion Intrigue, I'd say about Dominion. But because it's just crazy. I mean, it drives me nuts. That means I have to roll back up on the list. I have to go back to number 51. Or should I? Who am I to say? No, I'll just live with it. Number 42, Dominion Intrigue. Everything I just said about Dominion is equally true for Dominion Intrigue. It drives me nuts. I think this list is weakened by the fact that you have weird things like this. I'm sure this won't be the first weirdness on it, but anyway, moving on to number 41, Race for the Galaxy. I just talked about that. I feel like about a half an hour ago so. Brilliant game. Absolutely wonderful. Love the 2-player specific rules. Hate the hieroglyphics. And that's what made us get rid of it. Plus, ultimately, we liked Roll for the Galaxy so much more. And not least of which because, hey, they didn't use icons. They used text. I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. A word is worth 1,000 icons. And, yeah. Number 40 is El Grande. El Grande, when I did my top 10 games prior to 2009, a lot of people said I really missed, I really blew it by not including El Grande. I don't know. I've never played it. It's very likely I never will play it because my understanding is it's not a very good two-player game, which is not surprising because it's area control. It's arguably the greatest area control game ever designed. It may very well be, but if it's not good for two players, it's not good for me and Jen, so I don't have much to say about it. Then on to number 39, Patchwork, which, oh man, that's a neat little two-player game, and I very much regret having gotten rid of it. I got rid of it a while ago because a friend of mine really wanted to play with his girlfriend, and so I was happy. Okay, well, I know this Cottage Garden is coming out soon, and I bet you Jen and I will enjoy the Cottage Garden theme more than Patchwork. So, yeah, go ahead and take it and enjoy it with your girlfriend, and we'll get Cottage Garden. Now, fast forward to a few months later. Cottage Garden is neat, but it's so much lighter and fluffier. We really miss Patchwork. And ironically, he's broken up with his girlfriend. So I really need to circle back around and say, hey, can I get that Patchwork back? I bet you're not playing it much anymore, are you? But brilliant little Tetris-style tile-laying game with some really neat economic engine stuff going on as well. Highly recommend it. You can watch my run-through. Let's see. And then moving on to 38, Roll for the Galaxy. Wow. What was that? That's 1, 2, 3. 41 was Race. 38 was Roll. Now, I would rank Roll a lot higher, but apparently Board Game Geek agrees. Roll for the Galaxy trumps Race for the Galaxy. And, this is in Jen's top 10 of all time. It's in my top 20 of all time. It's the best dice rolling game. If I ever do a top 10 dice rollers, I'm sure it'll be my number one. It's absolutely brilliant, phenomenal game. Heck, just talking about it, I bet you is making Jen want to play it. Yep, she just nodded her head. Stop talking about it. You're just making me want to play it. So let's just move on to number 37, Dominant Species, which is a brilliant area control warfare. It's a warfare game, but it's a war between mosquitoes and marmosets and gecko lizards. That's not true at all. It's basically it's an area control game where early species are trying to become the dominant species of the planet. Mammals versus reptiles versus birds versus bugs versus something else. I forget what. And it's a brilliant design. Cannot fault it. But it is incredibly nasty, incredibly cutthroat, incredibly long, and ridiculously fiddly. It's so fiddly, it almost requires you have I've seen people have made special spread. Basically, every time, there are ways that you can change the board that changes the value of everything, and you're constantly having to reevaluate the value of the individual hexes that players are vying for control of. It's hard to describe, but I've done a run-through if you want to see more. Long story short, brilliant. I think it certainly deserves its position on this list, but it's definitely not one for me and Jen. At 37 is Dominant Species. Then on to 36, Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition, a game I will never ever play, considering it takes 6 hours and is 6 long hours of intergalactic intrigue, espionage, backstabbing, and out-and-out warfare. That just sounds like a god-awful experience to me. I can't imagine ever wanting to play anything like that. It's the very definition of anti-me and Jen. Twilight Imperium. But on to number 35, this is a phenomenal game, Concordia. Matt Gertz's greatest design of all time, and I love that every year he seems to be putting out more and more maps. I can't wait for the new map we just got that actually adds... I'm thinking of what does the new one add? Oh, no. The new one is just the smallest, tightest map to date. So I'm really looking forward to trying that because it's just an absolutely phenomenal game. We absolutely love it. Yeah, I'll have to just give my opinion, right? We love it. You knew that from watching the run-through. If you want to know why, go watch the run-through. Absolutely phenomenal game. I mean, this should rate much, much higher as far as I'm concerned. It's just about near perfect, Concordia. Then on to 34, Eldritch Horror. Eldritch Horror made my top 10 games I'm sad that I got rid of because we didn't like it. Because we didn't like it, but not for... quality reasons. It's a very, very quality game. It does what it sets out to do brilliantly, create these rich, evocative, narrative-driven event-driven games that Jen and I just found kind of dull because the decision-making was kind of on the light side. A lot of it was just, luck mitigation with a infinite variety of it's the height, and I mean this in a good way, of Ameritrash style design, and that's just a design style that we don't appreciate. So even if it's the best of that type of thing, it's just not something we particularly enjoyed. And you can find out why in my run-through for Eldritch Horror. Then on to number 33, Food Chain Magnate, which I did a run-through for. This was one of the weirdest run-throughs I ever did because I did the run-through not having actually played the game. I've never played Food Chain Magnate, and I never will because it is an incredibly cutthroat, vicious knife fight of a game where players are trying to one-up each other, vying for control over all these residential suburbs as they try to build their fast food empires and sell burgers and soft drinks to everybody in town and undercut the competition. Really brilliant design, but way too mean, way too long, way too sandboxy. So, not for us. Then on to 32, Voyages of Marco Polo, which is a wonderful dice worker placement game. We really need to play this again. I haven't played it much since we first got it, because, of course, that's just the nature of our existence. We play games a few times, we do a run-through, and then it goes up on the shelf, never to be played again. So sad. And what this game is known for is, every player when you start, you get your own, you can be Marco Polo, or you can be Marco Polo's dad, if I recall correctly, or you can be Kublai Khan, you can be all these different real historical characters from that time in history, trying to make your fortunes on the Spice Road by doing dice worker placement. And it's very, very sharp. But the thing that's most interesting about it is, whichever character you get a really super powerful special power. Any one of these special powers, one would argue, are so powerful they're broken. But the thing is, everybody gets a broken over-the-top special power. So everybody feels that the one thing they're good at, they're amazing at. And, you can get so much replay value out of this game because of the different combinations of special powers and how they play off against each other. And the board itself is variable. So it's a brilliant masterclass in how to create really nice variable setup and absolutely delightful dice worker placement game. 32, Voyages of Marco Polo. Then on to number 31, Orleans, which is a phenomenal game. It's in my top 20 of all time now with the Invasion expansion that came out, which turned it into a cooperative game. But even still, even the base game is absolutely wonderful. It is the de facto bag builder game, where over the course of the game, you are getting all these workers, throwing them into a bag in the beginning of every round. You reach into the bag, draw randomly what workers you're going to have available to you this turn, so that you can build an engine to get more workers to get points in lots of different ways. It's an absolutely phenomenal game. Love it to bits. And, always want more. That new expansion for it came out. Can't wait to try it. Number 31, Orleans. Number 30, Caelus. What do we think? Brilliant game. This is the game that put worker placement on the map. It wasn't the first worker placement game, but but worker placement, which is now by far the most popular. Is that true? I'm going to say it. It's kind of a gut feeling, but I bet you if I did the research, it would prove out that worker placement is the most popular Euro-style game mechanism today, and Caelus is what made that possible. Other games came afterwards and built on that, but Caelus is one of a kind. It's a brilliant design, and it's so heartbreaking that it is just so cutthroat and mean that Jen and I will never play that game again. But why should we? We've got Caelus Magna Carta. Number 29, Dead of Winter. One we'll probably never play because Jen doesn't care about the zombies, nor would she care about the prisoner's dilemma style decisions you have to make. And I'll be honest, I'm just not a really big fan of all the dice rolling Ameritrash style stuff. So, it's 3 strikes and you're out. But I'm sure it's great. Look how high it is on the list. It's got to be great, right? But certainly not for me and Jen. I still to this day get a lot of people requesting to do a run through. Sorry, folks, it's never going to happen. Let's move on to number 28, Seven Wonders, which is in my top 10 of all time. Actually, for the longest time, it was literally totally randomly, my number 7. I don't know if that's still the case anymore, but it is a brilliant card drafting game. And again, it's a civilization game, and it has warfare between players, but it does it in such a way that doesn't have to be nasty and all about players destroying each other and ripping each other up. I can only say to designers out there wanting to try to make inroads into the Care Bear market, which is typified by players like me and Jen, who like to build things instead of destroy stuff, study this game. It's brilliant. It's weird. A lot of people say it's a really great gateway game. I would say it's a terrible gateway game because it has so much iconography and it's kind of hard to teach for somebody who's never played a game before. I mean, it can work, but there are much better examples. But still, Seven Wonders, absolutely phenomenal game. Definitely deserves to be at this upper echelon. And then number 27, which is also in my top 10 of all time, Keyflower. Amazing auction/worker placement game where your workers they work as workers to do stuff for you, but they are also the monetary units you bid on to get the worker placement spaces that you need to place your workers. It's a brilliant, brilliant game. Absolutely phenomenal. Every expansion that's come out for it has made it even better. Love Keyflower to death. 26. Wow, talk about a fast riser. Is this the first game from 2016? 2016. Let's search. Yes, it is. Streaking. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. At 47, we had Mansion of Madness 2nd edition. But, I mean, it is a 2nd edition, so I don't really consider that the same. But Terraforming Mars is a totally new original title, came out this year, and has already rocketed up to number 26. That's a big deal. And with good reason. I mean, Jen and I, we have played it. It is a brilliant engine building game. I could certainly understand why for a lot of people it could be a race for the galaxy killer. It basically, the game is just this big, gigantic, thick deck of cards. Every time you play, you're going to get a different combination of cards. Every single card in this game does something interesting and unique and different. And every time you play, you're going to get your own special corporation with their own special power. You're going to get a bunch of cards. There's a bunch of different, paths to victory, and it's a brilliant design. And it's unfortunate that it is just riddled with player versus player, attacking each other, stealing from each other, destroying each other's stuff. It's heartbreaking because it's so mean. It would definitely make it on my top 10 games that I'm heartbroken that we got rid of because they were too mean, because it's absolutely brilliant. I'll be trying to get a run-through for it done before the end of the month, so you can see. But I mean, it's a brilliant game. I don't think it's at all unreasonable that it has rocketed so high so quick, because it's really well designed. Just it's a shame it's not for me and Jen. Number 26, Terraforming Mars. And then on to number 25, Time Stories, which is a wonderful experience. And, if you ever watched my original run-through, you remember I complained vociferously about the absolutely piss-poor two-player rules that it came with. And it's funny. I mean, after I complained about them so much, the developers, they post on Boardgame, well, here's some alternate rules. They were also absolutely terrible. I guess I don't blame the developers. Originally, this game, for the first 6 months before it came out, it was listed as a 3 to 5 player game. Or no, 3 or 4. That it didn't support 2 players at all. At the last minute, they put in 2-player rules. They clearly didn't care about 2-player, but they realized, we better make this 2-player compliant, because there's a lot of people out there who only play 2-player. And this is a great game. And more people should see it. But they did really, really poor 2-player rules. So actually, it's interesting. I love this game, Jen. Some of our most fun gaming of the last couple of years is playing this through all the different modules that have come out for it so far. But I still rank it very, very low. I rank it as a 7, even though it's a 9 in terms of the fun we've had. But I rank it as 7 because of its poor, terrible 2-player rules. Now, we have ultimately come up with our own official house variant, which we use, and it works really well. And it's ridiculous to me that they continue to stick with the official 2-player rules, but with our 2-player rules, we have found that it works phenomenally well, is engrossing, and very, very captivating. Just a lot of fun. It's incredibly light. In fact, I mean, to a certain extent, it's incredibly Ameritrashy. It typifies everything we hate about Ameritrash, but here it's done so well because of one neat trick where players are recruited as the storytellers. And it's absolutely brilliant. I've talked about it at length in my run-through for it, so you can go see more. But number 25, I do think it's deserved, even though I personally rank the game very low for kind of odd reasons, Time Stories. On number 24, Tzolk'in the Mayan Calendar. I believe this is in Jen's top 10 of all time. And it's in my top 30. Really, really brilliant game. Yes, the big spinning gears on the board are a gimmick, but they are a gimmick that works and creates an incredible worker placement game that does something unlike any other worker placement game out there. It simulates, or it adds into the economic simulation the concept of time. The longer you have your worker do work on his worker placement space, the more he will do. And that's incredibly, it's a simple twist. It's a simple addition to worker placement that really puts it head and shoulders above all the other worker placement games out there. So I think it definitely deserves to be this high. I mean, actually, it's interesting. Has there been anything that I've seen so far, because I'm up to 25 now, that I don't think deserves to be here? Let's see. Well, I can't speak about Battlestar Galactica. And no, I think this is, and I can't speak about Twilight Imperium, but this is a perfectly reasonable list. I don't think Dead of Winter. Yeah, I wonder about that one. I've never played it, so I can't. But from what I know, I don't know if it deserves to be number 29, the 29th best game of all time. But I've never played, so who am I to say? But anyway, number 24, Soul Command Calendar. Yeah, it deserves to be here. Number 23, Le Havre. Hey, you know what? I just talked about that at length a little while ago. So I'm not going to mention it again, but I'd say it deserves to be in the top 50, yeah. Brass, I just talked about that a little while ago too. Also deserves to be here. Number 21, Robinson Crusoe, Adventure on the Cursed Island. You know, we played it. I thought it was brilliant, and we traded it away as fast as we possibly could because it's another one of those cooperative games that's just cruel and unyielding and never gives you a moment's respite, and Jen hates that. And as brilliant as I thought that the card-driven event system was, this whole notion of if you draw a card, it's an event, you make a choice, and then the card goes back later into the event deck, and there are going to be consequences for your choice at some unknown time in the future. That is brilliant. That is absolutely stellar. I love that. But what I didn't love about it was that the result of your careful, considerate planning, as you tried to work out every single thing, ultimately came down to luck, not luck of the die, although there's dice rolling in this game too, but luck of the card draw. I would have liked to see a little bit less randomness in the game. Now, here's the thing. It just recently got reprinted. I picked up a copy of the new reprint at Essen. Jen and I, we're going to go back and try this again. We'll see if we have mellowed out. We'll see if Jen's gotten a little bit more accepting of unrelenting co-opness. We'll see if I've gotten a little bit more accepting of the random elements of it. So watch this space. We'll be revisiting Robinson Crusoe in the coming months. On number 20, Codenames. Yeah, that's reasonable. That's the one party game we own, in large part because it's a great little two-player cooperative game. But I have actually gotten to play it with more players, and it's a blast. It's absolutely phenomenal. In fact, this winter, we might be playing some 6-player of it when some friends who have some friends of friends are coming out to visit. So I imagine we'll be probably playing Codenames with them when they show up for Christmas. Great game. Definitely deserves to be in the top 20 at number 20. Number 19, Android Netrunner. I just kind of talked about that earlier. It's a brilliant game. Its asymmetry is absolutely phenomenal. And back in the day, I thought it was great. It's not something we'd want to play now because of the drip feed nature of it. And again, this is something I talked about in my run-through for it. But I think it's reasonable that it's in the top 20. It's that good. Number 18, Eclipse. We've tried to play this a couple of times. Because it's a 4X game. It's a space empire building game of the 4X's of explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. And it's that exterminate that kills us. Actually, that's not true. For the longest time, I always said, you know what? If I could ever find a 4X game that doesn't include the exterminate, i.e., we get to build our space empires, but we don't we get to explore the galaxy and then expand our empire and then exploit what we've discovered, and then we just don't have to exterminate, we don't have to fight each other. That'll be the perfect game for me. Because Eclipse does make you fight. Sooner or later, you're going to fight. So it's a no-go for us. And I've been saying forever, maybe we'll find one. Recently, I did. And it wasn't for us either. And you'll find a run-through for that coming probably this week, in fact. But it turns out the Explorer doesn't work for us either. And I didn't realize that about Eclipse at the time. I was so hung up on other stuff. But yeah, too in-your-face fighty-fight, too long. Brilliant game, but not for us, is Eclipse at number 18. On to number 17, Power Grid. This totally deserves to be here. It's a modern classic. It definitely deserves number 7. It could deserve to be even higher. I think it might deserve to be in the top 10 games of all time on Board Game Geek. It's kind of a shame that it's been pushed out by some of these other less worthy games, in my opinion. All that said, not for me and Jen. Terrible two-player experience. I mentioned this earlier. Back in the day, developers just did not put the love and attention into two-player that they do these days, and I'm so happy that I didn't discover designer board games back in the early aughts, because we might not have stuck with it. I'm so glad we stumbled across them in 2009 when the renaissance of two-player specific finally came into effect. But yeah, number 17, Power Grid, definitely deserves it. Number 16, Blood Rage. Don't know, never played it, never will. I'm sure it's great. Eric Lang is a wonderful person, an incredibly clever, brilliant designer. So I'm sure he deserves it, but I have no idea if it's good enough to be at number 16, or if it's riding the hype wave. I don't know. But number 15, Star Wars Imperial Assault. Man, not a fan. Not a fan at all. And I look at games like this, which is just a bunch of plastic, a bunch of read cards, a bunch of Byzantine little rules that are impossible to keep track of, but are there to help enhance the narrative. That, again, typical Ameritrash style stuff, and I just don't get it. But I accept that it's wonderful if that's what you like, and so I will accept that it deserves to be this high on the list. I don't know that it does, because man, I look at that design, I just don't see anything good in it, because it's just so far removed from what Jen and I consider to be the hallmarks of a good design, of a good game. But it's the same thing. I can't watch a professional sports match and enjoy it. I understand everybody else enjoys it. That game of basketball or football or whatever it might be. I just look at it and stare blank, saying, what is the point of this? And I look at Star Wars Imperial Assault and say, what is the point of this? I don't get it. So, no comment. Number 14, War of the Rings, 2nd edition. Never played it. War game, never will. Got nothing to say. Number 13, Mage Knight, the board game. I did a run through for it. What I said then still stands. I stand by it. It is an Ameritrash game for Euro fans. It is a brilliant, elegant, lovely, smart, clever deck builder design, completely buried under an avalanche of needless, persnickety little rules. And I hate it. I understand for some people, that's the joy that this game gives you of navigating that Byzantine maze of rules and exceptions to rules. But for me and Jen, forget about it. Just do not like. So number 13, Mage Knight the board game, not for us. Number 12, Through the Ages, Story of Civilization. I talked about that earlier. It's a great game. I'd probably still have it if it wasn't for Nations, which killed it. Is Nations in the top 100? Nations. Yes, it is. Nations sitting at number 70. I can only hope it rightfully continues to climb and eventually eclipses Through the Ages. Because for me, it's the better game. But that's just for me and Jen. Number 11, Agricola, my number 2 game of all time. So sad that it has been pushed out of the top 10. That is a travesty, particularly considering what pushed it out, which is, I'm looking ahead, it's at number 6. Still, one of the best games ever. Amazing worker play. No, actually, no. It's an okay worker placement game. It's an amazing game because of its cards. Because I've talked about this at great length, particularly in my whatever year Caverna came out in when I did my top 10 follow-up for the year 2013, I talked about what makes Agricola so special. And it is special. Jen, I both love it. It's my number 2. It might be her number 1. I'm not really quite sure where it sits for her. But it breaks my heart a little bit that it's not in the top 10 on Board Game Geek. That's just wrong. But at number 10, this makes me very happy, Castles in Burgundy, it is Stefan Feld's greatest game design. It is so brilliant, and it deserves to be here in the top 10. It deserves to be even higher, but still, I'm just happy it made the list. Number 9, Puerto Rico. Yep, I talked about this earlier in the run-through. I think this deserves to be at number 9. I think that's reasonable. This is interesting. Number 8, Seven Wonders Duel. Talk about a rocket. It came out in 2015 and immediately shot all the way up to number 8, eclipsing its precursor, Seven Wonders, which is sitting at number 28. 20 points higher on the list is Seven Wonders Duel. Does it deserve it? Is that right? Bearing in mind that this was not a game for me and Jen, because again, it's another example of a game that's just way too mean. Here's the thing. If Jen and I didn't mind stealing from each other and destroying each other's stuff, I would have, this would probably be, yeah. I would say it is maybe better than Seven Wonders. And Seven Wonders is in my top 10 games of all time, except for the fact that it added all this needless, pointless carnage that wasn't in the original Seven Wonders. I wish that when Bruno Cathala got together with, original Seven Wonders designer Antoine Bauza, I can only assume it was Bruno's influence that brought in all the stealing and the attacking and the destroying. Because it just ruined it for us. But I do think it's reasonable that it is that good. It is that brilliant. And yeah, I don't have a problem. I know some people look at this being so high and rocketing so high that there's something fundamentally wrong and broken about Board Game Geek's ranking system. I don't think so. I think Seven Wonders Duel is that good. It is that near perfect if you're that type of player. Jen and I aren't, so we had to say goodbye to it, and it breaks my heart, but I think it's reasonable that it's at number 8. Number 7, Scythe, a game we will never play. And its designer, Jamie Stegmaier, man, he pushed really hard to try to convince me. I mean, he actually talked about how he was actually thinking of me and Jen while he was designing the game. Me and Jen as a stand-in for all the Care Bear players of the universe, trying to come up with a way that you could have a game that has mechs battling each other and destroying each other and, chasing each other out and stealing stuff from each other, and yet could still be enjoyed by Care Bears. I don't know. I will never try because I have studied this game. I've read the rules for it several times now. I've watched a bunch of run-throughs for it. I can see its brilliance, and I can certainly see it'll be something Jen and I will never, ever play. So I can't say if it should be number 7 of all time. But considering I've disagreed with very few of these calls so far, I'm inclined to agree it must be just that good. Let's move on to number 6. This one, it doesn't belong here. Number 6 is Caverna, the Cave Farmers, which is the one that pushed Agricola out of the top 10. Caverna is great. I love a lot of the stuff it does. A lot of the additions it made to the Agricola formula. More than anything else, this is the most brilliant thing it does. It takes those cards, which were kind of an abstract concept, and actually makes them a concrete thing that exists in the world. That is brilliant. I would love to see that retrofitted back into Agricola. And I love the fact that it makes family strategy a little bit less dominant by giving you less points for family members. That's brilliant too. That's something that I would love to see rolled back into Agricola. But it ripped out the heart and soul of what makes Agricola truly phenomenal. And again, if you go back and watch my follow-up Top 10 of 2013, I talk about why. But long story short, I guess it deserves to be here. But that's the thing. It's like having Dominion and Dominion Intrigue on the list. They're the same gosh darn game. They're just variants of each other. They should be in the same spot. I believe Agricola and Caverna should share number 6 on this list. I believe that would be appropriate because Caverna is just the sandbox version of Agricola. Anyway, so that's my feeling on that. Number 5, Star Wars Rebellion. Another bullet streaking up to the top. Again, it's not one Jen and I will ever play, but from what I've seen, it looks really, really smart. It looks, as Tom Vassell loves to say, Star Wars in a box. Probably nobody does it better. I don't know if it deserves to be the 5th best of all time, but I bet you it is really good. I bet you it deserves to be in the top 20. Number 4, Terra Mystica. Smart game. I talked about why it doesn't work for me and Jen. Not of good 2-player design. We did not feel it was very well designed for 2-player. And a lot of people disagree with us, but for us, it's the opposite of a sandbox, and it's a little bit too pre-scripted. A lot of people say it's not. I will defer to them because we've only played it a couple of times, but a couple of times was enough for us. We're never going back. But I definitely agree it's brilliant. It's reasonable that it's in the top 10, I think. Number 3, Twilight Struggle. I don't know. I'll never get to play it because Jen will never play it with me. It's a war game. She doesn't like the subject matter, and it's way too long. There's a lot of reasons we'll never play that game, but I think it's reasonable that it's here. I have no problem with it being this high. Because I even not having played it, I can just read the rules, I can see what it does, and I can appreciate how brilliant it is. Number 2, this is another one that is wrong. Number 2 is Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. And number 12 is Through the Ages, A Story of Civilization. Why are there 2 separate entries on Board Game Geek for this? This is absolutely ridiculous. These things should be combined into one entry. In the same way that Agricola and Converna should be one entry, Dominion and Dominion Intrigue should be one entry, Through the Ages, a new story of civilization, which basically just be called Through the Age in 4th edition. It's the same basic game. They made some tweaks here and there. It's the same game. And I think they both deserve to be here because it is a brilliant game. I think it's reasonable. I still think Nations is better, but that's number 2. And then number 1, Pandemic Legacy Season 1. I have talked at great length about that in the past. All I will say is, agree, number 1 of all time.
Yeah, baby, yeah!
I don't know if you could hear that, Jen shouting from the kitchen, yeah, baby, yeah. Okay, there you go, Dave. I thought this would be a bit quicker, but what was I thinking? Okay, folks, I've been able to stretch long enough now. Let's move on to some Q&A. I think Jen's ready to get on the mic. Okay, everybody, and now to finish off the podcast, we will do the monthly Q&A. And surprisingly, this month there were very few Qs. We only got 9 emails, and unlike in the past, we don't have half of them filled with like 10 sub-questions in each one. So this is actually going to be pretty quick relative to what we've been doing for the last few months. Are you ready, Honey Pie?
I am ready.
Okay, well then, let's just jump right into it, starting with the game-related ones, and then afterwards we'll do the non-game-related ones. And, well, I've already done one of these 4 earlier in the podcast, so let's just go to the other 3, starting with this question from Chris, who asks, at what point does a game's art and visual presentation negatively affect your interest in a game? Given how the hobby has grown in the past few years, why do we still see games with such bland or thematically lacking visuals? Or have we just been spoiled? Honey Pie, what do you think? At what point does art and visual presentation negatively affect your interest in a game?
I don't know how to answer that, really. Is it like a percentage? Well, it's...
Yes. Define an exact percentage point. Up to 2 decimal places.
Okay. Well, I would say that my visual enjoyment of a game is probably between 20 and 30% of the game.
Of your overall appreciation of the game?
Yeah, I think so, actually. Because
Okay.
you spend an awful lot of the game staring at, the pieces or the board or the components or whatever. And if it's nicely done, then I would say it would increase my appreciation and enjoyment 20 to 30%.
So to Chris's question, which was more on the negative side, you're kind of skewing positive there. He was more asking, well, at what point does ugly or bland art make you hate the game?
Well, I would say
basically what you're saying is the worst the art of a game could possibly be, the absolute worst of the worst, if the rest of the game is still great, you're still going to, on the whole, love the game. It's still going to be a 70% success.
I think so, yes.
Okay. That's fair enough. Yeah, you're right. It is a tough question to answer. I mean, it's so crazy subjective. I mean, I have to admit, my inclination is to kind of skew more towards... I mean, honestly, I don't think bad art or bland art, or, considering the number of prototypes we played, the complete and total absence of art,
exactly,
as is often the case with the prototypes for Kickstarter we play, I don't think that affects me in the slightest in a negative way. I can't think of a game where we have ever said, oh my God, this is such an eyesore, I just don't want to play this game. I don't think that's ever happened. And we played some eyesores.
Yeah, I mean, the only game that actually springs to mind, which is the art where I just really didn't like it, was the rock and roll one.
Oh, Thrash and Roll.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which
I thought the game was great.
Yeah. And and it's well done art, but it's a particular style of art that is kind of Marmite, I suppose. Love it or hate it kind of a thing.
Yeah, but even that, I was still definitely willing to play the game.
Yeah. Exactly.
Enjoyed the game.
Yep. So, I would certainly say it's kind of what you're saying. Good art or great art or evocative art or inviting art or whatever, or just art that we like, enhances the game. But I don't think I've ever seen it detract. Wait. Okay.
There was that one game recently that we played, remember, and I told you that the font on the cards was so awful.
Yes, that was Pandemic Iberia.
Okay. Now that is where it's actively hurting the game because it's not legible.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. I guess that falls...
That doesn't really fall into bad art. That just falls
into... Well, he
into...
said art or visual presentation. But for the most part, he really means, art and graphic design and all of that stuff. That was a fair point. Now, I'll still stand by the fact that I just think you need to be wearing your glasses when you're playing that game, because I could read the board just fine. But I understand what you're saying. Yeah, the font kind of got lost in the busyness of the board a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, just on the whole... the main example I can think of, just the other day, we played Manhattan Project Energy Empire. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you remember, we played a prototype of it a year ago.
Of course I do.
And it was ugly. Just absolutely, it was one of the most ugly prototypes I've ever filmed a run-through for. So bad that I actually did an update say, hey everybody, if you only ever watched my original run-through, here's what the final game looks like. And it looks really, really nice. But I remember when we played that ugly prototype last year, we still loved it. We were still just head over heels in love with that game.
Yeah.
And do we love the game more now that it looks pretty? I don't know. I guess.
I think we do.
Okay.
Because it just bumps it up a bit.
Yeah. I guess
we wouldn't not play it because it was ugly, but I think we would more happily think of playing it now that it's even prettier.
Sure. So there's no downside to art for us. It's only potential upside. Let's see. Then we have Daniel, who asks, in my and Jen's opinion, why aren't there any deep, heavy, crunchy co-ops? Mage Knight is the only truly deep co-op I know of, and it's not even marketed as such, and none of the other ones come even close. Would you like a heavy, meaty co-op? Honey Pie?
My main problem with co-ops is that they throw a bunch of stuff at you and make me feel absolutely hopeless from the very first turn.
Right, but a light co-op can do that just as easily as a heavy co-op.
Yeah, so I'm not sure why I'd want a heavier, meatier co-op that makes me feel even more despondent.
But no, that it's completely separate. He's not saying you're talking about difficulty. How hard is it? How much does it beat you down? He's not talking about that. He's talking about how deep and complex it is. You compare Pandemic, which is a very streamlined, simple, elegant game. We could teach your parents how to play Pandemic, no problem. Yeah. I'm not saying it's a light game, because, there are some interesting, tough, challenging decisions to make in that game, but it's still very simple and smooth, and, and if you play it on easy, it's not even particularly challenging. But if you compare that to, imagine trying to teach your parents to play a Pandemic versus Agricola.
Yeah.
Even Agricola is a deeper, heavier, richer, meatier, crunchier game.
Okay, I gotcha.
So that's the thing. And it's interesting. He points out, I'm actually going to Board Game Geek right now to the advanced search, because I want to test this. Let's see. Filter on Board Game.
Lots of co-op games that we've played.
Well, yeah, we play lots of co-op games, but...
What's that Time Stories? We play that co-op.
Yeah, but... What?
Is that not meaty?
I'm trying to think... compare any co-op we've played that you can think of. Forbidden Desert, Pandemic, there's tons of them.
Yeah.
And compare that to Dungeon Pets. Just how far Dungeon Pets puts you through the ringer. That's a moderate. I'm not going to say that's a super heavy game, but that's on the heavy side of medium weight.
Okay.
Because you have so many pets, you have so many cards you're having to try and figure out the worker placement, the trying to figure out how many imps. There's a ton of stuff going on in that game. Again, imagine just trying to teach your parents how to play Dungeon Pets.
Okay.
And imagine there were a co-op game that was that heavy and dense and involved and complex.
Okay, well, yeah, I'd like it.
Okay, there you go.
As long as I'm playing with you.
Actually, was that the question, though? What question was one, would you like it? Or actually, no, there was two questions. Would you like one? Answer, yes. Other question, why aren't there any? And the thing is, I don't know if that's actually true or not. I am actually on Board Game Geek right now. I do not search expansions, search for everything with cooperative play, but I can do a sort and say, have at least 10 people rating it, and I want to see games that are at least 3.5 on the 5-point, what's it called? The scale, the weight scale. Or the weight range. Let's see. And 3.5, that's actually pretty heavy. Because nothing makes it to a 5. So, what have we got here? Let's see, we've got, Mage Knight, as he mentioned. Kingdom Death Monster, I'm never going to play that. Robinson Crusoe, Arkham Horror, Mistfall, Star Trek Frontiers.
Is that the one we just played?
Yeah. This came up with what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 games that at least, that people have actually ranked fairly high. Although it's interesting, he mentioned Mage Knight. It shows up here along with Star Trek Frontiers, which is basically Mage Knight in space. Honestly, those are not cooperative games. Those things are designed from the ground up to be competitive games. And in my opinion, if you play those cooperatively, you're not getting the entire experience, and you're getting kind of a substandard experience. But Arkham Horror is certainly... Arkham Horror is a really simple game, but it's just completely drowning in an endless, meaningless sea of stupid little persnickety rules, which is actually really what the problem is with Mage Knight as well. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I am not interested in a game that would get its weight from ridiculous amounts of complexity. And just endless rule upon rule upon rule that's easy to lose track of.
Quadruple second that.
Yeah. Because it's interesting. There are two ways to define the overall crunchiness of a game. It's weight or its complexity. And I think a lot of people get those two things confused. Complexity, I mean, in my opinion, the more complex it gets, the worse a game gets. The more there are rules upon rules just for the sake of rules, to have thematic covering of every possible thing that can happen or whatever, like Arkham Horror, is just absolutely terrible. Yeah, it's complex and it's meaty, and it doesn't give you a lot to think about, it just gives you a lot to process. And honestly, that's of no interest to me whatsoever.
And it's of no interest to me to sit around while you check.
While I reread the rules 50,000 times to try to, what was this? I know there was some weird exception to this rule that, so if you're talking about the weight, you can either go with depth or complexity. What we really love is a lot of depth. Where a super duper simple decision of play this card into this slot or this slot, something as simple as that could be the toughest decision to make in the universe because there are so many implications and ramifications for that decision. And that's what we like to see. And, I would say for the most part, that is kind of the weight that a good co-op does give, because in a co-op, you're not playing against another human being who can create their own depth and weight just because they're a challenging opponent. You're playing against a system that has to be designed to make things tough for you. And there are sometimes just agonizing decisions to be made in any good co-op. But, I think they are few and far between. Why would that be?
Because it's difficult to program the AI to be worthy of a human.
Ooh, there's a good answer. I like that. Yes. Co-ops are still, actually, relatively speaking, a kind of a new breakthrough in board game design. There aren't near as many of them as there are competitive games. There aren't near as many designers working on them. And there isn't near as tall a mountain of established designs to build on. Co-ops are like undiscovered country. They're a brand new frontier. And so I think maybe as we move forward in time and, people keep building and iterating on stuff that has come before, you probably will start to see heavier and heavier, meatier and meatier co-ops. Although it's another interesting thing as well. I don't know, Daniel, But if he's looking, I mean, often people who are looking for insanely deep, heavy, meaty, crunchy games are a certain type of gamer that has absolutely zero interest in cooperating with other gamers because they have zero interest in putting their testing themselves against an artificial simulation. They don't feel that it is a meaningful game experience unless they are going up against equally brilliant strategic tacticians. And, for them, for a lot of people who want really, I'm talking about, hardcore war gamers and stuff like that, really deep, chess players, people who want this insanely deep thing, they want to be tested against another human being. You tell them, hey, let's work together to play against this pre-programmed AI system. And they're like, I don't want to play against that. I want to play against a human being. So I don't know, maybe there's just not as much of an audience when it boils right down to it. And then as Jen said, I think it's entirely right. It's going to be a lot harder. And really, I mean, heck, that list of examples I just found on Board Game Geek, they are creating that deeper, crunchier, richer thing, not by, that heavier game, not by making it deeper, but by making it more complex. And I would say that's true for Mage Knight as well. I mean, Mage Knight and Star Trek Frontiers is a brilliant system. I love the deck building of, hey, look, I've got these cards. Each card has two different uses, but, and how you put them together determines how well you do with the game. But, I mean, that game is heavy just because there's about 1.5 bajillion stupid little rules and exceptions to every single thing that just drives me nuts and makes me hate playing the game. I don't want to see that. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know. Hey, do you think we've covered that well enough?
Yeah, but also, just to reiterate, the people that want that kind of really deep experience, as you said, they want to play against somebody. They don't want to play with somebody.
Yep.
So I think that's part of it too.
Ooh, that's deep. They want to play against somebody, not with somebody. All right. Last game question. Brian asks, actually, and this isn't games, this is about the show. Would you or one of your fans be willing to make a Rahdo hates dice supercut video? Every time I do a run through and yell at the dice for being ridiculous, Brian can't help but crack up. So I'm not going to do it because honestly that'd be a lot of work, but I get what you're saying. Yeah. Sometimes, I mean, gosh, what was a video that just went absolutely off the rails insane where it was just, when I just start shouting at the dice because that's impossible and doing my Luke on Bespin catwalk, that's not true, that's impossible type thing, I do get a little carried away sometimes. So I can imagine, what? Type. That would be cute, but I'm not going to do it. But heck, maybe somebody listening out there will, get the ambition to do it because that would be pretty funny.
Well, hey, it's Christmas break coming up, so people will have time, right?
Yep. So, that was it, honey. That was it for the game stuff. So hold on, everybody. We'll be back for the personal Q&A, of which there's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 emails. Folks, remember, you can always send emails to questions@rahdo.com, and we'll be happy to answer them. But there weren't many that showed up this time. But for now, for people who don't care about personal stuff, they're only here for the games, I'm just going to say thanks for listening. Have a very nice day. Talk to you later. So long. Bye-bye. And now, for folks who want to hear the personal stuff, hold on. Okay, everybody. Jen's still here. She's actually lying on the floor right now because I think she threw out her shoulder or something.
Oh, just woke up with my shoulder funny.
She woke up with her shoulder funny, so she's just lying on the floor, all stretched out, not moving at all, ready to answer your questions. Starting with Jason, who, honey, Jason would like to know,
yes.
Do we miss living in the big stone castle-like house that we used to live in Malta?
Sometimes.
He always loved seeing our videos when we lived there.
Yeah.
And
I got to say, it is a lot handier to live on Malta than it is to live on Gozo.
Yeah. Well, certainly, that's a different thing. How do we feel about living in Malta versus Gozo? But yeah, the big house, which for people who don't know, you can go do a search for it online. It was in the walled city of Mdina, which is spelled Mdina. It was actually the location that a lot of Game of Thrones first season was filmed in, because it has a really wonderful medieval fantasy-like quality to it. And Jen and I, we lived there for 9 months, I guess.
I think you lived there for a year, but
I lived there for a year.
Yeah.
Jen lived there for 9 months. And, I loved living in Mdina.
Yeah, that was awesome.
It was very, very cool. And the house was neat, but it was certainly not convenient. There was nothing convenient about living in that house. I mean, it had, a 3-story vaulted ceiling, and all the walls were stone.
Yeah.
So everything echoed like crazy. And it definitely hurt the sound quality of my show, filming in there. But, I mean, remember, just trying to watch TV was painful because there was just all this crazy echo reverb. We had to go buy some special speaker that would, kind of did a directed, didn't kind of go omnidirectional, but was to try and minimize that. And, and it wasn't great for Daub, who was a very old girl.
Yeah.
And, it was 3 stories, and we'd have to go 3 stories up of slippery marble stairs every night.
Yep.
So that wasn't great for
I
her.
bought her little doggy booties, but, we didn't actually end up using them, to give her better friction.
Yeah. And, it was cool, but, I don't miss it at all. And the other thing, living in Mdina, it's funny. It's called the Silent City.
It is
That's
not silent.
because it's been around forever, and it used to mostly be peopled by monks, I guess. But it is nothing but silent now. Just nonstop tourists right outside our front door, loud church bells ringing 24/7. Literally all night long. Sometimes it was absolutely insane. So I don't miss that either.
Nope.
I do miss the convenience of living on Malta because living out on the far, far north end of Gozo is lovely and it's gorgeous, it's secluded, but it is also incredibly inconvenient.
Yep.
But yeah. You have anything to add to that, Honey Pie?
I just also really loved, every time you walked out the door, you felt like you were in this amazing historical place.
Well, you were. You didn't feel like it. You were
I was.
like it.
And I just really drank that in when we lived there. I just felt that it was an amazing opportunity to live somewhere that ancient.
Yeah, that was really, really cool. But every time you walk out the door here, you got the Mediterranean Ocean.
I'm not saying it's not fantastic here. He was asking about Mdina.
Okay. Well, there you go, Jason. He also had maybe a stretch goal next year to move back.
Oh, gosh, no. No, I can't put up with that. Oh, those church bells.
Yeah. The bells.
We have some churches that are about, a couple miles away from us now. And so if I go outside, I can hear church bells, but it's not...
But yeah.
It's not reverberating through my skull.
Yeah, not 100 meters away. 50 meters away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also when they did the festa there, oh my gosh, because it's a walled city, there's not a lot of greenery. All that, just the noise just reverberates.
Yeah. Mdina must be the #1 tourist attraction in all of Malta, in the entire country.
Yeah.
So it's like we were practically living in Malta's version of Disneyland. Living inside Disneyland.
Yep.
For all intents and purposes, just in terms of And so, I don't miss it, I gotta say. All right. It was cool.
It was definitely cool. Glad we did it.
No need to go back, though. All righty. Paul asks, how many hours on average would you say we get spare time outside of board gaming and glass making?
Oh, well, we sleep and we eat, right? Walk the dogs. I don't know. We live.
Well, he has a follow-up question as well. How do we like to spend our free time together when we're not, quote, working? Because board games are work, basically, and glass is work.
But on the other hand, it's things that we're both interested in, and I think you hear that. Oh, find something to do that somebody that you do even if nobody pays you to do it, and you've found the work that you should be doing with your life. So
I don't think that's how they put it.
Well, it's something like that.
Do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, I think or something like that. But
that's a more succinct way to put it.
Yep.
But so anyway, I'm interested in glass regardless of if I'm actually making that day or whatever. So, I spend a lot of my time, looking at glass and thinking about glass and whatever. It's not necessarily work for me. So that's one of my hobbies. I still, even though it's work, it's also a hobby.
Yeah. Well, I have the same thing. If I'm not filming a game or I'm not learning a game or I'm playing a game, I'm pretty much reading about games. I'm on Board Game Geek all the time. I'm constantly answering questions that come up on YouTube and Board Game Geek and Reddit and email and Geek Mail and Facebook and Twitter. And I spend literally hours every day just being my own social community manager for Rahdo Runs Through. This is a job that other places actually hire somebody full-time to do. I spend a lot of time doing that. Jen, I know you spend an hour to 2 hours every day reading when you go to bed.
Yep. I like to read.
Yep. And after Jen goes to bed to read, I stay up and spend an hour or 2 hours watching TV shows or movies that Jen has absolutely zero desire in watching.
I don't even want to be in the same room.
Yep. And so there's that.
We walk the dog.
And we walk the dogs.
Yep, I enjoy cooking.
Maybe an hour a day. No, not even. If you were to average it out over a week, I would say it's probably a half an hour a day. Because some days we're bad and we don't walk them.
Yeah, but some days I take them up over the hill and around the bend.
Yeah.
So I think it probably averages out to an hour a day.
Yeah. All right.
Not for you, for me.
Fair enough.
Okay.
So, I think that's about it, Paul. Let's see. David sent an email entitled Olive Oil.
Would that be Popeye's girlfriend?
Well, I don't think it is about the Popeye Village, no. Since he made a trip to Spain, he's become enamored with fine olive oil. It's now competing with board games for his discretionary income.
Ooh.
He was wondering, given that it's getting on to oil harvest time, do they produce olive oil in Malta, and is it used a lot in local cuisine? I have no idea.
Yes, they do, and yes, it is.
Okay. That all you got to say?
Yeah, they actually do like vineyard tours, but they do olive grove tours, and you can go and you can actually watch it being made, the pomace and the squeezing of the oil and all of that.
Have you done that?
I haven't, but I've heard that it's available. So yeah, if you come to Malta, that would be one of the things you could do.
All right. Honey, David has a question for you. You mentioned a while back a book that you read about an alternate history where the Mongols conquered Europe.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember the name and author?
Yes. The author is Con Igildson. Can you just look that up since you're...
How do you spell it? Or how do you think you spell it?
I think it's spelled C-O-N-N.
Yeah.
I-G-U-L-D.
I-G-U-L-D.
S-O-N, I think.
No. C-O-N-N, I-G-G-U-L-D-E-N. You were close. Igildon. Con Igildon.
Yep.
Is the author.
Yep.
Of the best-selling book Emperor and Conqueror?
Well, he's done ones on like Caesar as well, but look for the one with the Mongol Empire.
Right. But now I think, correct me if I'm wrong, David has it slightly correct. Those were not alt history about how the Mongols.
Correct. No, that would be
it was a historical fictionalization of the real stuff that happened. Yes. Or it was like a fictionalized accounting of what really happened.
Well, who knows what really happened? It was so long ago, but it's his best reconstruction of.
Yeah. And it's not an alternate history where, look, here's what happened to the world because the Mongols didn't turn back.
Correct.
I think what David's incorrect is you have talked about in the past reading Con Igildon's books and really being blown away when you were confronted during reading. Does the book address it at all?
Yes.
Okay, so the book actually has passages or chapters devoted to, and oh my gosh, just imagine what would have happened if they hadn't turned back and gone back home.
No, not really. Not passages, not chapters. It's in the historical context. Whereas if this particular brother of Genghis Khan hadn't been turned back at this particular time, he would have spread further west and conquered all of Europe, and we'd all be Chinese.
Right, but it doesn't actually tell any stories in that alternate version of the world.
Correct.
It's just you've mentioned in the past that blew you away.
Yeah, it fired my imagination.
Yeah. So anyway, and they're apparently excellent books. You absolutely love them.
Yes, I did enjoy them, and I thought they were very thought-provoking.
Okay.
But there's a bunch of violence, so I kind of skipped over that.
You read it with one eye closed, kind of a thing.
Kind of. Okay, we're having an
Okay, let me
attack.
just skip to every 10th word.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Because they do attack a lot, and after you've read maybe the first attack thing, you don't need to read every attack thing.
Yep. All right. So last question is from Charlotte, who wrote an email in an incredibly small font.
Oh.
Can I zoom this in? There we go. Let's see. Charlotte asks, when we first came to Malta, did we experience culture shock? What are some of the cultural differences between Malta and the US/UK? Do you perennially feel like tourists here? Do you ever have that feeling at all? I am thinking this could well happen if you move to a popular holiday, if one moves to a popular holiday destination. I'm guessing you do not speak the local language, since you can get around with English fine. Let's see. Apparently Charlotte asked in the past the difference between the U.S. and U.K., and we've answered that. So now she's interested about the cultural differences related to Malta. She herself has moved from Germany to the UK, and then just a month or so ago to Canada. So she's experienced varying degrees of culture shock. But the negatives pass quickly and become resigned to the fact that while they adore many of the things in the countries that they lived in, cultural facets of the UK that I will never get used to and don't particularly want to get used to in Canada. But that's fine. So, honey, apparently in the past we've talked about UK at length, but we have not talked about Malta. Or, our culture shock as Americans.
Sure. Well, I think one of the main things that we discussed before about the UK, and it certainly holds true even more so for Malta, is just the difficulty of finding and buying what you're trying to find and buy.
We are Americans. We were born and bred to be consumers.
Well, I mean, you need what you need, right? It's not like getting a dog collar or something should be that big a palava. You should be able to go to find a store, go inside, have a reasonable selection, and buy something. It's not asking a lot. But in Malta, in particular, I think because a lot of people don't move around very much, it's a tiny country, for one thing. Everybody knows when you're born somewhere, I mean, you just know where all the stuff is. And a lot of the stores have little tiny signs in their windows, and you wouldn't even necessarily know it's a store. Once they close their garage doors or something, you would never know there's a shop in there. So being a foreigner, you just don't know where stuff is. So, I mean, you do eventually find your feet, and you find enough that you get what you need, and the other stuff you either buy on eBay or have your mom send you from the U.S.
Yeah.
But, I would say, so that was my number one thing. There's other things like there's a different sensibility about littering here, which we find really disappointing.
Well, litter exists everywhere, but it's just off the charts here in Malta. I mean, I can only assume it is a cultural, societal thing.
Yeah.
I mean, so many times we're just driving through the countryside, and look, here's an old, busted up clothes washing machine just thrown to the side of the road.
Yep, or mattresses.
And it's been there for years. And no one's ever going to do anything about it, ever, ever, ever. It will decompose, over the next, however many hundreds of years. It'll just sit here. And, and that kind of stuff is absolutely everywhere.
Well, and builders will just back their trucks up and dump, bricks and tile and plaster dust, and they'll just, for whatever, I don't know why they can't take it to the civic amenity site and get rid of it there. I mean, that's what they're for.
Now, the thing is, I mean, that kind of stuff happens everywhere in the world. But in Malta, which I looked it up recently, is the 9th smallest country in the world. It's just much more noticeable because there aren't that many places that are off the beaten track. There's no off the beaten track in this country. Every track is very well beaten. So you just stumble across it all the time. Just junk and garbage everywhere. Unless you come here as a tourist.
And you stay in the tourist area.
Because then, I mean, those places are kept immaculate. And but as soon as you go off tourist row, this is it's one of the most prosperous countries, one of the most prosperous economies in the EU. But you wouldn't know it to look at it. I mean, the whole country just feels very run down and not well tidy or looked after. And it's really crazy. We've also talked in the past about just the absolute insane cultural obsession here with killing small migratory birds. Yeah. Or capturing or killing. I mean, Maltese that we absolutely love. People we just think are very, very sharp, compassionate, lovely, progressive people. Capture wild birds and keep them in cages for the rest of their lives. And they think it's perfectly normal, and they don't think twice about it at all.
No, and it's a hobby. It's one of those things that they look forward to every fall.
Yeah, I mean, so they're, that's just freaky. I just can't get used to that at all. Just so strange. I mean, that's not, to be fair, there are certainly the younger generation is turning away from that more and more. Although there's plenty of folks in the younger generation who, embrace their heritage and want to go out and capture small migratory birds, which is terrible for the birds because we're out here in the middle of the ocean. I mean, this is pretty much the only island for these birds to stop at. And it's a death trap. Don't stop here, birds. Try to find another way.
And we can't put a sign out for them because they don't
I know. And that's just absolutely horrible. Let's see, what other cultural things are there?
Well, but also, I mean, Malta has culturally not been very animal activist oriented.
Sure.
But things have gotten a lot better.
Just in the time we've been here,
Just in the time we've been here.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a few years. So yeah, it's definitely getting better. And it's a smart country. Everybody's very politically involved. I mean, during the elections, you get 90% turnout, and that's voluntary turnout. That's not a mandatory vote here. It's absolutely, there's a lot of absolutely amazing things about this. The country itself is crazy religious. It's like 90% Roman Catholic. What, honey pie?
But they don't shove anything down anybody's throats.
No, that's true. But I mean, they do still, it's really deeply, deeply ingrained. Which is why, abortion is still illegal. Abortion is totally illegal in the country. So you pretty much have to leave the country or do, illegal backyard stuff. Divorce was only made legal, I think, within the last decade. And so there's some odd, to our eyes, cultural impact of that. But on the flip side, maybe a positive cultural impact is family is incredibly strong here. Familial ties. Maybe in part because it's such a small country, there's no place for anybody to go. But these days, I know in the West, in the States, it's become this weird divide between Gen Xers and millennials, that millennials are living with their parents later and later and later into life. And everybody's saying, what's with these millennials? They're completely, they're lazy and shiftless. They won't get out and make their own way in life. In Malta, parents are perfectly fine. They're happy to have their kids stay with them. What? Where are you going to go? Stay till your 30s. We don't care. We want you to be here. We're a tight family unit. Have your kids. So there's very different attitude in that regard as well. In terms of language, almost everybody speaks very fluent English. We've occasionally run into somebody who we've had to have dealings with that speaks in kind of broken English. That's kind of tricky, but it's so rare.
Yeah.
And just even when you hear Maltese talking amongst themselves, I've gotten to where I can easily notice the blurring and blending between Maltese and English and Italian. They just constantly switch back and forth between the three, depending on whatever they're talking about. So I hear that a lot because it's largely a trilingual nation because they grow up learning Maltese at home, English at school, and Italian by watching TV. So, which is actually really, really cool. I'm certainly very jealous that we, stupid, ignorant Americans can only speak one language. And nur ein bisschen of German, of Deutsch. So, there's a lot of shifts. Would you say there has been any culture shock? I guess the birds and the animal rights stuff is probably the most shocking, and the garbage is the most shocking thing. Just the culturally absolutely wacky attitudes there.
Well, and also on the positive side, we can say that Malta's very low crime.
Crazy low crime. It must have one of the lowest crime rates in the world, or in the Western world. It's absolutely. It's. I'm not going to say it's non-existent, but in a country of, I think it's 500,000. It's not even 500,000 people in this entire country, something like that.
50,000.
No. Gozo is 50,000. Malta as a whole, I think, is like 400,000.
Oh, yeah, I think
something
you're
like
right,
that.
Actually, 350 and 50
something
of them
like that.
Yep.
But yeah, even for the incredibly small population, crime is just crazy low. You read the newspaper; it's breaking news when somebody gets pickpocketed or something. That's like, what? Someone in the country had their pocket picked? Somebody get Inspector Clouseau on the case. This must be solved. Which is cool. That's absolutely amazing.
I think the police mainly wander around giving people parking tickets.
Yeah.
They seem to accrue a goodly many of those.
Yeah. That's not to say. There is the occasional murder, and there are some bad things too. But they're very few and far between. Oh yeah, and driving is absolutely insane here. I guess that's par for the course. It's kind of similar to Italian driving, although when we've driven in Italy, we didn't find it anywhere near as bad. But yeah,
you really have to be a defensive driver in this country.
well, no, you have to be an offensive driver in this country.
No, everybody else is offensive. That means you better be on the defense.
No. They only respect strength, honey.
Well, I just drive slow and keep my eyes peeled.
If you want to get ahead on the road, you must take what is yours.
No, that's true.
Damn the consequences.
Yep, pull out into traffic. They'll stop.
Yeah, they'll stop. Whatever's in the rearview mirror, that's their problem. You're only moving forward. There is no backward.
Well, and even if you're moving forward, they'll stop.
Yeah. So it's definitely different in a lot of ways, but it's still lovely. We very much enjoy it.
Yep.
And that's it, folks. Thanks for your questions. And that's it for the entire podcast. Maybe a bit shorter than normal, but what the heck. I'm just going to end it right there and say thanks for listening, everybody. Once again, questions at Rahdo.com. And otherwise, have a very, very nice day. Talk to you later. So long.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.